Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History of podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Professor Stephen Carlson. And today we're discussing his paper titled The Text of 1 Peter in Polycarp and Irenaeus. The link to purchase it will be in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment. And with that being said, Stephen, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Jacob.
The first thing I want to ask you is, what are the complications in trying to examine Polycarp and Irenaeus as textual witnesses of 1 Peter?
Well, there are a whole bunch of complications, which makes it very tough. The text of both Polycarp and Irenaeus, and I guess I should, for our viewers, remind them who Polycarp and Irenaeus are. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna in southwestern, modern-day southwestern Turkey. It's called Izmir today. And he was a very long-lived person. He lived until his mid-80s, and he traveled to Rome around the middle of the 2nd century, like 150, in support of his province's practice of celebrating Easter on the 14th of the Jewish month of Nisan. That's called the Quarter-Deciman controversy, and he has been felt to be like one of John's last disciples, and so he kind of claims a pedigree that goes back to Jesus with only a very few steps: Polycarp, John, and then Jesus. And even though later people will say that Polycarp wrote letters, we only have one letter of Polycarp that is surviving, and it's found in editions of the Apostolic Fathers, and it's called To the Philippians. And this letter accompanies a set of other letters that another bishop wrote by the name of Ignatius, who was Bishop of Antioch. And Polycarp collects these letters and sends them to Philippi because the Christians in Philippi were interested in what Ignatius had to say. And so this is kind of like a cover letter to that. And so we're not quite sure when it was written. Eusebius thinks it's in the 120s. I think it's probably a bit later, maybe even as late as the 150s. And so we have this cover letter by Polycarp in it, in which he alludes, and then sometimes even quotes precisely from a number of New Testament works, including 1 Peter or 1 Peter. And his letter is preserved in both Greek and Latin. But the problem with the Greek text is that all our Greek manuscripts come from a single defective manuscript in which there was like an internal choir missing, and it goes straight from the middle of Polycarp into the middle of Barnabas, and so we only get the Greek for the first 3/4 of the epistle. And so we have to rely on an earlier Latin translation of Polycarp's epistle to kind of fill out the rest of it. And there's some interesting bits that if we had the Greek towards the end, we might make a little bit better sense of it. But we have it in both Greek and Latin. But the Greek is defective. We only have the first part in Greek. And we have a Latin translation which has its issues as well. And so that is one witness that we have is Polycarp. Irenaeus is the bishop of Lyon in France, modern day France. Then it was Gaul, and he remembers seeing Polycarp as a young boy, and he kind of mentions that, and he wrote among his many other works. He wrote 5 books against all the heresies as they existed then. He wrote them originally in Greek, but we don't have a Greek manuscript of any of them left. We have huge portions of book 1 of Irenaeus Against the Heresies because Epiphanius basically quoted liberally from that. Epiphanius is a late 4th century bishop in Cyprus, and his own work was against the heresies as well. And but the entirety of it was translated into Latin, and it's a very kind of literal, almost an interlinear translation, like word for word. It's like terrible Latin, but those who read Greek are less offended by it than those who regularly read Latin. And books 4 and 5 were also translated into Armenian. So we have an Armenian translation of the last 2 books of Irenaeus Against the Heresies, and that's also a literal translation. And you could kind of look at these 2 separate literal translations and get a pretty good sense, although not exact, of what the underlying Greek is to Irenaeus Against the Heresies. And in both cases, Polycarp and Irenaeus quote from or allude to 1 Peter a number of times. We generally have it for Polycarp, like 2/3 of those we have it in the original Greek, and then like the last one we have to source the Latin. And then in Irenaeus we have a literal Latin translation, and about half of those have a literal Armenian translation, and I think one of them has a Greek fragment. So we I think it's a Yena Porphyros, which has like a little bit of it in Greek. So we kind of know what it is in Greek, but it's only like a few words of a line. It's very fragmentary. So the main challenges to evaluating how Polycarp and Irenaeus cited the epistle of 1 Peter is that we don't have the original manuscripts. We don't even have them, for the most part, in the original language. We are reliant upon much later copies. Some of these copies are in translation, and these translations have their own issues of their own. But what's important about these is that these are both 2nd century Christian writers, or among the earliest that we have to have quoted from 1 Peter. Only Papias of Hierapolis around 110 could be earlier, but the only thing we know from Eusebius, a church historian, about 325, is that Papias used a testimony from 1 Peter. He doesn't tell us what that testimony is. I suspect it's where 1 Peter mentions Mark at the end, but that's just an educated guess. So we have no text from Papias, but we do have text from Polycarp, and we do have text from Irenaeus in the 2nd century. So it gives us a peek at the text of 1 Peter in the 2nd century, provided you kind of factor out all of the vagaries of their own transmission. But what's nice is more or less independent of the main continuous text Greek manuscript transmission for 1 Peter, although there are signs that the translators sometimes slightly conform the text to the then current standards. So I hope this is kind of clear. There's a lot of players involved here and names that may not be completely familiar to most people, though your audience is probably fairly used to hearing these names from time to time.
Definitely. How much of First Peter is quoted by Polycarp's letter? Is it a lot of it, all of it, some of it?
There's about puts it in about 3 or 4 places, so you get about 3 or 4 sentences. 1 Peter is like 5 chapters, so so you don't get a whole lot of it, but what we do have is definitely unmistakable from 1 Peter. And similar stats for Irenaeus. He quotes about twice as much. What's kind of nice is that some of these passages Irenaeus quotes multiple times, so we get to see how stable he is in quoting from 1 Peter.
How does Polycarp use the text?
He doesn't really say as Peter says in his epistle. He never introduces it that way. He kind of integrates his quotations from it. His Polycarp's basic style is to do kind of a scriptural pastiche. Almost everything he says is like weaving in various quotations from the New Testament in a variety of ways. So the first big use of 1 Peter in Polycarp is that he's first talking about what Peter says in Acts, one of those quotes there, and then he kind of segues immediately into a quotation in 1 Peter in chapter 1, and then he kind of segues again further on. So we kind of build these things up like that. It's the way he quotes, he kind of expects his audience to get the allusion. So in a sense, he assumes that the epistle 1 Peter is familiar to both him and to his audience, which are presumably Philippian Christians.
Do Irenaeus and Polycarp, do they overlap on any of the quotations, or do they share, or do they have totally different quotations of First Peter from one another?
For the most part, they don't overlap, but on First Peter 1:8, they do. Irenaeus quotes it several times, and Polycarp has it once, and so that's kind of that's the one where we can get the most leverage in figuring out what their text is.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by translator harmonization of Polycarp's letter in 1:3 to 1 Peter 1:8?
Yeah. When a translator translates a text, in this case, we're talking about the Latin translator who translated Polycarp's Greek epistle into Latin. They're going to come across the translators are going to be familiar with their own text of the Bible as they're used to seeing it, and so they'll tend to kind of read in, if you will, to some extent. It's all kind of subconscious almost, that they'll somewhat conform the text they're translating to the text they're most familiar with, which is their own Latin text. And so there's a tendency to kind of maybe not translate the Greek exactly or woodenly or something like that, but to kind of make it look a little bit like the text that they're most familiar with. And this is true not just for translators, but for scribes as well. That when they copy a New Testament text, there's a tendency there that, and this is particularly true within the Byzantine period, which is after late antiquity, throughout most of the Middle Ages, where the scribes are professional monks who are reciting scripture every day, and so they really know their form of the scriptural text really well, and so there's a tendency to update it according to how they best know it, and this phenomenon is called Byzantinization, and it is responsible for a good amount of textual variation that we see in the New Testament manuscripts, whereas texts from different families, not the Byzantine family, but like late Alexandrian or Western or other kind of families, as they get copied through the Middle Ages, they tend other texts becomes more and more like the Byzantine standard, and so that's why we call it Byzantinization. So what that effectively means is that an agreement with the Byzantine text is not necessarily old. It may be only as old as the scribe. But disagreements with the Byzantine text may well be older unless it's a scribal error. So there's a bit of an asymmetry of the value of variants where agreements with the standard text aren't worth as much as disagreements with the standard text.
Can you tell us a little bit about Polycarp and Philippians 2:1 blending, having a blended allusion to 1 Peter 1:13 and Psalm 2:11?
Right. All right. So blended allusion is they take in like one statement, they'll take bits from two different sources of scripture, and so they'll tend to combine it. And here Polycarp combines 1 Peter 1:13 and Psalm 2:11. I'll select the first half. Let's take a look at it. I think the first bit. Yeah. So the first bit comes from 1 Peter 1:13, and the last half of it comes from Psalm 2:11. And this form of blending was very popular in early Christianity, and you even see it in the Jewish Midrash, where they like taking two separate parts of Scripture, kind of mush them together or mash them together, and it's the way of having Scripture interpret Scripture, and it's a way to kind of get a fuller thing out of it. We see it in the Gospels quite a bit, where it's like Mark will cite something that combines, say, Isaiah and Zechariah, or we have something with like Judas in the potter's field that has Jeremiah and Zechariah, and so we have a number of, I'm sorry, Mark is Isaiah and Micah. So we have a number of these kind of different blended quotations, and they seem to be very popular in early Christianity. You could see them in these mixed testimonies in a variety of places. So it's not really surprising to see that, although it does kind of add to the challenge of figuring out what exactly he's getting from First Peter, and what exactly is he getting from the Psalm.
Do blended allusions like that occur elsewhere in Polycarp's use of First Peter?
I can't recall offhand, but I think it's pretty common, and he'll even blend from different parts of the same letter, like different parts of 1 John get blended as well. So it's definitely a fact of his rhetoric.
Does he seem to really integrate First Peter as a major aspect of his theological beliefs from what you can tell, or is it more secondary to other texts that he cites?
I haven't noticed anything really doctrinal about it. I would say 1 John is a lot more important for a Polycarp, but he does kind of view it as a source of making these various statements of his. I mean, the writer of Polycarp seems to be one of the less original minds in the Apostolic Fathers, and so almost everything he says is somehow sourced to some kind of a scripture as well. It's basically a pastiche, so it's really hard to hard to see the originality of the mind behind the product.
Before I pivot to Irenaeus, what are your concluding thoughts when it comes to Polycarp's use of First Peter, in the sense of what does his use of First Peter generally tell us?
It tells us that we have a very early, and in fact, the earliest witness of the text of 1 Peter is Polycarp. It's from the middle of the 2nd century. It, for the most part, agrees with the standard kind of received critical text that we have, except in 1:8, where both Polycarp and as it turns out, Irenaeus attest to a slightly different form of the text, which has an extra word in it. And if you take that seriously, I think that one has a good chance of actually being the original wording. And if that's the original wording, it kind of means that the text critic has to look at all sources of evidence for the text of the New Testament, not just continuous Greek manuscripts, but also versional evidence, which is the Greek text as it's translated, but also quotations to find where the original or initial text lay. And Polycarp and Irenaeus, and as well as some old Latin ones, and it gets into some Greek manuscripts as well, like 629, which is influenced by the Latin. That some of these witnesses can preserve an earlier text that is earlier. Can preserve a text that is earlier than all the other extant Greek witnesses. Earlier than Codex Vaticanus at the beginning of the 4th century, Codex, or earlier in Codex Sinaiticus around the same time. And so what this means is that the text critic has to look at all sources of evidence to see what the text really is, in order to establish what the author most likely have said.
So now I'd like to pivot to Irenaeus. When you look at the attestations in the Latin and the Armenian, how can that complicate when looking at Irenaeus' citations of First Peter, like with verses like 1:8, for instance?
Right. So there's a number of complications, excuse me, that you have to worry about. One is the fact that Latin and Armenian, although they're both like sister languages to Greek, they're all Indo-European languages, and they have a similar grammar. They're not the same. Like Latin has no articles, so it doesn't have the words like the and Armenian has like 3 articles for different for different distances from the author, and so there's bits of the grammar that don't translate and just can't be rendered in the language, and then you're not sure whether, if there's a textual variant involving synonyms, you're not sure what the translation, which synonym the translation is picking up. So you get kind of, it's like you get kind of like a noisy signal, or kind of like an old television cast with like snow on it. Is you could kind of see the big picture, but some of the individual details are just kind of not there. And so that's one problem with getting it in a foreign language. The other problem is that the scribe may like unconsciously, or maybe not so unconsciously, kind of recast the scriptural text into the form that the scribe finds most familiar, and so there's always an opportunity for that text to become more vulgatized or Byzantinized in the translation. So you have to watch out for that as well. But it's nice that when we have both the Latin and the Armenian, we could kind of cross-check them because they were done independently of one another. And so that where they happen to agree is a very good chance that that they're looking at the same Greek.
Does any of the citations of First Peter by Irenaeus, do any of them have different wording from what's in First Peter?
Yeah, like some of them even have different wording from among themselves. Irenaeus can be a bit loose in quoting from it, so you have to identify the actual like meat of the quotation from what he may have adapted it to the syntax of his of the citing context that he's in. Hugh Houghton calls it flattening, and so a lot of like introductory materials like particles and such, that those tend to get kind of conformed to the context rather than the exact quotes. They don't quite have quotation marks like we did, although the earliest manuscript of Irenaeus that we have, which is within like 20 years of when he wrote, does have the diplay, which looks like a greater than sign in the marginal column marking out scriptural quotations. So we do know which line we do know that they would mark the lines that contain biblical quotations in the margins. We would get that, but often like the exact beginning and end we're not really quite sure of from time to time, and that could be an issue as well.
Are there any occurrences in any of the instances that Irenaeus uses First Peter in which it might indicate that Irenaeus knows a more earlier version of First Peter that may indicate corruption as post Irenaeus?
Yeah, I think it might occur in 1 Peter 1:8 where we have it's kind of, I should give you the text. I'll say it in English because I'm not sure if people can understand my my Greek pronunciation there. But in like the standard text, and this is kind of like my translation of 1 Peter 1:8, it goes whom, and I'm translating these participles very kind of literally as still participles, even though you would want to like make them a subordinate clause in English, where it goes, whom not having seen you love, in whom now not seeing but believing you rejoice with a joy unspeakable and glorified. And so that's very kind of difficult syntactically. You have in whom and in whom seen, is it believing, or in whom you're rejoicing? It's not kind of clear. It uses a very unusual usage of the word that corresponds to but. In Greek, it's they, and it's usually at a clausal level, except here it's used at a phrasal level. And so so the syntax is really gnarly, but it kind of makes some kind of passable sense, and it was very stable in the Greek in the Greek transmission as well. But but I think it's possible that you could have like another word believe in front of believing, and the which is what not just possible, is what Irenaeus and Polycarp both attest to. And it would be translated something like, whom not having seen you love, in whom not seeing you believe, comma, but believing you will rejoice with a joy unspeakable and glorified. So we have two different forms of the verb to believe right next to each other. In Greek it would be pistevete, bestevontes, and so they have the first 6 letters in common, and it's a very easy Scrabble error to like start with one word and just skip to the next. It's called parablepsis, or in the latest commentary on the text of the New Testament by Hugh Houghton, he calls it eye skip. So so your eye just skips from one word to the next, and a lot of words just kind of drop out that way. And so it's it's entirely credible that this a verb could have dropped out, and in which it kind of leaves like a rougher syntax. It is very smooth syntactically if you include the verb. Some will say, well, it's so smooth that the translator had to put it in. Well, but we do have some Greek evidence for it, so it's not just a translator thing. But that would indicate that Irenaeus and Polycarp have access to a text that is older than the archetype, if you will, which is the most recent common ancestor of every single Greek continuous text. And the ones that do have it, like 629, are a mixed text that has both Greek and Latin tradition elements in there. And so 629 in the late medieval period is able to kind of source that earlier version through the Vulgate and the Old Latin transmission that way. This is a reading within the Old Latin and Vulgate. It was preserved there, and so we do have old versions of it, not just in Irenaeus and Polycarp, but we do have an old Latin manuscripts. But they're Latin manuscripts; they're not Greek. And so this is about the edge of what we're able to detect, because otherwise, if we didn't have the old Latin, we would think that well maybe it's just an authorial thing that that Polycarp just wanted to make the syntax a little easier, and that somehow Irenaeus picked up on him because Irenaeus knows Polycarp. But it's also in biblical manuscripts in Latin of 1 Peter as well. So it's not just an authorial kind of quotational vein, but it is attested in biblical manuscripts.
Does Irenaeus use 1 Peter 1:8 multiple times?
I think I have about 3 times. And they're all kind of slightly different, which is kind of interesting, primarily because he likes to adapt the beginning of it to his context. It's a flattening.
Which other verses does Irenaeus make use of from 1 Peter?
Let's see. Do I have a list here? We get one Peter 2:22 about Jesus, who did not sin, nor is deceit found in his mouth. We get 1 Peter 2:24 in Polycarp. A whole bunch of things. So it's just a few places. It's not very much.
And then my final question, what is your conclusion about Irenaeus' use of 1 Peter? What does that tell us?
What it tells us that he is a witness. He's an early witness to the text of 1 Peter that is independent of our manuscripts. That some of that, even if his readings are wrong, they're early. But he has to be used with a lot of care and caution, because we don't have we don't have Irenaeus' original Greek in most places, and even if we did have his Greek, we have to factor into account his basic freedom as an author in quoting it. But these are invaluable witnesses to the text of the New Testament in the 2nd century.
And before we close, I'd like to remind everybody that the link to purchase the text of 1 Peter and Polycarp and Irenaeus will be in the description below and in the pinned comment. And with that being said, Stephen, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you very much for talking about this.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.